Throughout human history, civilizations have risen to great heights, only to fade into silence. Understanding why this happens requires us to look beyond dramatic events and examine the slow, quiet forces that erode societies from within. Sustainability, in its simplest form, means the ability of a system to maintain itself over time. For civilizations, this involves balancing resource use with environmental capacity, maintaining functional institutions, and adapting to changing conditions. When these balances fail, decline often follows. Historians suggest that environmental pressure has played a significant role in many historical declines. Deforestation, soil exhaustion, and water scarcity gradually weakened agricultural foundations. As farmland became less productive, food supplies diminished, populations faced nutritional stress, and economic stability eroded. These processes unfolded over generations, often invisible to those living through them. Economic strain frequently accompanied environmental degradation. Evidence indicates that trade disruptions, currency devaluation, and rising inequality created long-term instability. When wealth concentrated among small groups while broader populations struggled, social cohesion weakened. Markets contracted, tax revenues declined, and governments found themselves unable to maintain infrastructure or services. Administrative complexity also contributed to decline. As civilizations expanded, their governing systems became more intricate. Bureaucracies grew larger, communication networks stretched longer, and coordination became more difficult. Research points to cases where administrative costs eventually outpaced productive capacity, draining resources faster than they could be replenished. The relationship between population and resources formed a critical dynamic. When populations grew during periods of abundance, civilizations expanded their agricultural systems to match. But these expanded systems often pushed environmental limits. Evidence from ancient irrigation networks shows increasing salinization of soil, reducing long-term fertility even as short-term yields remained high. Communities became dependent on production levels that could not be sustained indefinitely. Infrastructure maintenance presented ongoing challenges. Roads, aqueducts, granaries, and defensive works required constant repair and renewal. As economic pressures mounted, maintaining these systems became increasingly difficult. Deferred maintenance accumulated, and eventually critical infrastructure began to fail. Transportation slowed, water supplies became unreliable, and storage capacity diminished, each contributing to broader economic decline. Technological stagnation sometimes accompanied these pressures. When societies faced resource constraints, investment in innovation often decreased. Craftspeople focused on immediate needs rather than developing new techniques. Knowledge transmission between generations became less systematic. Research suggests that some civilizations lost technical capabilities they had previously mastered, as specialized skills disappeared when economic conditions no longer supported their practitioners. Educational systems also felt these strains. Training new administrators, engineers, physicians, and scholars required stable institutions and available resources. As economic conditions deteriorated, fewer families could afford extended education for their children. Literacy rates declined in some regions. The pool of qualified individuals able to maintain complex systems gradually shrank, reducing institutional capacity precisely when adaptability was most needed. Trade networks proved particularly vulnerable to compounding stresses. Long-distance exchange required security, infrastructure, and mutual trust between distant communities. When any of these elements weakened, trade volumes decreased. Specialized goods became scarce, forcing communities toward self-sufficiency. This reduced economic efficiency and eliminated the surplus that had previously supported non-agricultural specialists, further contracting economic complexity. Social imbalance further accelerated these processes. When institutions failed to address inequities or adapt to demographic changes, trust in governance eroded. Communities fragmented, cooperation decreased, and collective problem-solving became more difficult. These social fractures made civilizations less resilient when facing external pressures. loss of adaptability often marked the final stages of decline. Rigid institutions, ideological inflexibility, or resistance to innovation prevented societies from responding effectively to new challenges. What had once worked well became inadequate, yet systems remained locked in place. Gradually, capacity to function deteriorated. Climate fluctuations intensified these vulnerabilities. Extended droughts, unusual flooding, or temperature shifts disrupted agricultural cycles. Civilizations that had developed during stable climatic periods sometimes found themselves unable to adjust when conditions changed. Historians note that climate alone rarely caused collapse, but it frequently amplified existing weaknesses. The accumulation of small problems proved more devastating than single catastrophes. A slight reduction in rainfall combined with degraded soil meant smaller harvests. Smaller harvests led to reduced trade, which decreased tax revenue, which limited infrastructure maintenance, which further reduced productivity. Each element reinforced the others in descending cycles. Evidence from archaeology reveals this gradual nature of decline. Urban centers slowly contracted rather than suddenly emptying. Construction quality decreased over time. Craft specialization diminished. Trade goods became scarcer. These changes occurred across decades or centuries, rarely announced by dramatic moments. Modern research emphasizes that civilizations did not fail due to moral weakness or inevitable fate. Rather, they encountered structural challenges that exceeded their adaptive capacity. The specific combinations varied, but common patterns emerge across different cultures and time periods. Understanding these patterns matters because they reveal how complex systems respond to stress. When resource bases narrow, when institutions calcify, when social bonds weaken, and when adaptability declines, civilizations become fragile. Small shocks that might once have been absorbed instead trigger cascading failures. The lesson from history is not that collapse is inevitable, but that sustainability requires constant attention. Maintaining productive landscapes, flexible institutions, social equity, and adaptive capacity demands ongoing effort. Neglecting these foundations creates vulnerabilities that accumulate silently until systems can no longer support themselves. Civilizations declined not through sudden catastrophe, but through the gradual erosion of the systems that sustained them. Environmental degradation, economic imbalance, administrative strain, and lost adaptability compounded over time until societies could no longer function as they once had. The historical record, though incomplete, consistently points to these accumulated pressures rather than single dramatic causes. In the end, it was the slow unraveling of sustainability itself that marked the transition from vitality to decline.